History is chock full of cases of espionage, counter-espionage, and running moles. And the higher up in an organization the mole is, the more access to sensitive information they have. Igor Gordievsky was a highly placed KGB source that MI-16 ran, who was highly useful to the Western powers. He even helped avoid a nuclear showdown because of the information that he was feeding to the Western powers. America has been subject to predatory moles run by the KGB. There's Robert Hansen, who was a highly placed agent in the FBI. There was Aldrich Ames, who was the head of counterintelligence in the CIA. And this is not a new phenomenon. Judas Iscariot was was a member of the was in the intimate circle of Jesus Christ, and he famously was paid 30 pieces of silver to betray our Lord. And so we come to the recent case against the Southern Poverty Law Center, titled United States of America versus Southern Poverty Law Center, Inc. I've read the indictment against that organization by the United States Justice Department, and let me say that I know I have occasionally, as a defense attorney and as a prosecutor when I was a prosecutor, I have run into and had dealings from time to time with people who were associated with the U.S. Justice Department. Well, it would not be fair to say I had dealings with them, but I have run into them from time to time. There are dedicated, intelligent professionals in the U.S. Justice Department. And so it is heartbreaking to see what's happening. And this lawsuit against the Southern Poverty Law Center, this criminal prosecution, is amazing, because you cannot read this and think that whoever it was that drafted this knows the first thing about the usefulness and use of moles, of counterintelligence. Because if I may summarize this, the nub of the complaint is that the Southern Poverty Law Center committed fraud by claiming that they were intensely trying to undermine and deactivate racist, anti-American organizations. And the nub of the theory of the United States government is that they had paid informants, and by paying these informants, they were actually not undermining these organizations. They were, in fact, supporting them. And that seems ludicrous. That seems Orwellian, to think that even when you read the complaint itself, there's one operation they describe in somewhat more detail than others, in which they used a highly placed operative in a racist organization to steal 20, I want to be careful about saying steal, shall we say to whisk 25 boxes of documents out of that organization, copy them, basically doing to this racist organization what Daniel Ellsberg did to the Pentagon when he pulled out and released the Pentagon Papers. And then after they'd copied these documents, they put them back. The taking was discovered, and then they paid somebody else, another paid informant, in order to take the rap so that they could keep in place their the paid informant that had actually engineered the seizing and return of these documents. Is that clear enough? Anyway, they took these documents and they issued a report on the activities of this organization, I guess adhering to the old philosophy that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So they were casting sunlight on what this organization was doing. And to do so, they used what they found in these documents to expose the nefarious practices of this organization in a report that they issued based on the contents of those boxes. And the first thing I thought about when I heard about this indictment was a book that I have been reading recently called Hitler in Los Angeles. And this is an amazing story. The Nazi regime was keenly interested in Hollywood because they were keenly interested in propaganda. And they felt that Hollywood had this opportunity, that if they could infiltrate Hollywood, if they could somehow use its immense broadcasting capacity for their own purposes, or if not, undermine Hollywood's ability to be used potentially against them, that there would be a great advantage to the Nazi regime. And they even planned one day to assassinate the heads of the studios in Hollywood. And one of the reasons that they didn't, in fact, the principal reason, so far as I can tell from this book, that they did not do that is because there was a lawyer in Los Angeles who realized the danger that Nazi front organizations were posing to America, and realized the extent of the Nazi underground spy movement in America. And he paid informants to infiltrate those groups and collected information about these organizations, much of which he shared with the United States government. And the reason that he had to do that was that at that time, before World War II, America even then was so focused on what they perceived as the communist threat that they paid scant attention to the greater threat posed by the Nazis. And the great difference between the communists in America at that time and the Nazis was the Nazis were underground. The Nazis were concealing what they were doing, whereas the communists were fairly open about propagandizing workers and propagandizing Americans, trying to tilt America to their point of view. And in fact, many, including people in the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, valued their contacts among Nazi sympathetic organizations, because those Nazi organizations were feeding them information about the communists, which the American law enforcement highly valued. So to some extent, this lawyer in Los Angeles was working against institutional law enforcement, which to some extent was protecting the Nazis. And if what the Southern Poverty Law Center was doing was wrong, then what this lawyer was doing in Los Angeles wasn't right. And I mentioned the plot by these Nazi organizations to who, by the way, made common cause with organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. I mentioned their plot to assassinate heads of studios in Hollywood. And the reason that didn't go forward is that by the time they hatched this plot, they also realized that they had been thoroughly infiltrated and that they would not be able to pull off this scheme of assassination without being discovered in advance. So they called it off. The people who were designated to commit the killings chickened out. Good. So that's why it's puzzling. That's why it's puzzling that the United States has postulated that by running these moles, as it were, the Southern Poverty Law Center was in fact supporting the extremist organizations that it was infiltrating. Yes, it paid a lot of money to these people over a period of about 9 or 10 years, according to the federal indictment. The Southern Poverty Law Center paid some $3 million to its paid informants in these organizations. And it's even possible that from time to time they got played. This method of infiltration, this spying technique, is as old as history. And what the United States government seems to be hanging its hat on is the fact that while these moles, while these paid informants were participating in these organizations that they were spying on for the Southern Poverty Law Center, while they were doing what they were doing, while they were being moles and informants, they were incidentally conferring benefits on these organizations. Duh! If an informant wants to advance in an organization, they can't just sit in a corner knitting tea cozies or playing games on their cell phone. They've got to show the organization in order to advance up the organization that they are useful to the organization. And that obviously involves doing useful things. And so, although there was an incidental benefit, the greater benefit was to the organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center, that was having its informants advance to positions where they had access to more sensitive information because they were in positions where there was reposed in them greater trust. It just seems to be amazing that the United States is complaining that from time to time these people actually helped these organizations by, for example, transporting people, being agents of transportation to some of these organizations to invidious rallies. In this book by Stephen Ross, Hitler in Los Angeles, one of the most useful moles was a man who was the driver for one of the top men in these organizations. And as his driver, he could get the man he was driving talking and learn a great deal that he could share with this organization that was running the moles. Well, if by being a driver for some of these invidious organizations, this mole for the Southern Poverty Law Center was somehow supporting these organizations instead of actively undermining them, then the same could be true of this man who ended up being the driver of a top leader in these Nazi organizations that were trying to undermine the very idea and security of this nation, the United States of America. It's just absurd. It's Orwellian. This complaint is Orwellian. There's an old saying that those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. I don't know if there's a Christian equivalent of that. Maybe the story of Nebuchadnezzar, the ancient Babylonian ruler whom God drove to insanity. He ate grass and lived in the fields for 7 years until he acknowledged the greatness of God and was returned to his sanity. I hope that there remains in our federal criminal justice system that sanity among some of the very good people in that organization, and that as a whole the organization will be restored to sanity sometime soon before they can become wholly agents of injustice rather than doing the job they're supposed to do, which is to protect the American people. How they expect to win this case, I can only guess. I can only guess that they're hoping that during jury selection they can somehow manage to stack the jury with jurymen and jurywomen who secretly are resentful of the left-leaning Southern Poverty Law Center and who will swallow the absurdity of these charges wholesale in order to punish an organization that they resent because they perhaps are in secret or open sympathy with the organizations that the Southern Poverty Law Center has infiltrated. I don't think that's going to happen. In the end, I trust the American justice system. In the end, I don't think that the members of whatever jury is impaneled are going to betray their oath and perpetrate an insane injustice. But the stakes are very high, because at the end of this complaint, the objective of the government is clear. Based on the allegations that they have made that this infiltration has constituted a wholesale fraud against the donors toward the Southern Poverty Law Center, who thought that they were funding an organization that was dedicated to undermining racist organizations, whereas in fact, according to the government, they were supporting these racist organizations. Based upon that allegation of fraud, they want to forfeit all of the property owned by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which could be traceable to those donations, which is basically, I would suppose, everything that the Southern Poverty Law Center owns. In other words, ultimately, the government wants to destroy that organization by taking away all of their material support. And by the heavens, I pray against that happening.